you all for being with us this morning. We're so excited to welcome Jennie Birkholz as our speaker today. Jennie is the principal with Breakwater Light, a consulting firm that partners with multi-sector organizations and communities focused on positive social impact. And she's going to be sharing with us this morning about creating whole faith communities through a charity to liberation model. So Jennie, thank you so much for being with us, and I will pass the baton over to you.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be able to present and to share some time with you all. I'm really excited to be able to start and share this model that we've been rolling out in several communities, talking about this wholeness of communities, and it's really talking about how do we live into the wholeness of a community. Everybody is part of where they live. The community influences their wellness and their ability to thrive. And how a church or a faith community or any organization chooses to create a mission or a model of mission impacts what that community will look like. And so how you craft that framework of that mission will depend on whether or not that creates dependency or empowerment for that individual. So really the focus of this work is to look at how can we empower persons with the work that we do and improve the vital conditions of those communities. We know this is something that we're very familiar with, especially those who work within this, is the Good Samaritan. And we've often talked about giving the intervention at the time that they are hurt, but also talking about what can we do to fix the road of Jericho. And it assumes that everybody is traveling on the same broken road of Jericho. And that's what we've talked about, is that we need to fix the road of Jericho. So like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. talks about, so persons aren't robbed and beaten on that road, which is extremely important. But we've also recognized that some people are more likely than others to be robbed and beaten along that life path. And so that's what we call inequities within our communities. And we know that persons with mental health and persons with substance use disorders are more likely to face incarceration, are more likely to struggle with transportation, more likely to struggle with housing and homelessness. And so their road to Jericho is a lot more difficult than my road to Jericho, if that makes sense. And so that's when we talk about equity and what that truly looks like. When you do, as a faith community, when you are helping persons or accompanying persons with behavioral health, you can't ignore that road. And you have to think about how to make that equitable, and not in the same way that you would for everyone else. And that's how you create a wholeness within a community. And so this goes beyond maybe a lot of persons have heard about social determinants of health or the upstream, and that's kind of been something that has been a buzzword for maybe 10 years or so. But now we're moving more into what we call the vital conditions of a community. And what's very important about this terminology is that it takes the blame off of the individual and says the vital conditions are about the actual community themselves. And so it's the community that has responsibility to look at these things such as transportation. And is there when we look at humane housing, it's not just about does that person get housing, it's about does the community actually offer housing that is healthy, that is humane, that is accessible? Um, and so that's the vital difference between social determinants of health, and we look at these vital conditions within a community. Um, what you'll also see here is that it doesn't just say employment. Are they working? But we talk about is meaningful work, and is the employment at a rate where they can actually live? And we know that work has to be meaningful in order for you to thrive and to be happy, and that's something that we have multiple studies on. um, a thriving natural world. We've connected health and well-being to the natural spaces around us. And is there healthy air? Is there healthy water? And we even look at something as big as Flint, Michigan, Flint water. Um, and cancer causing agents within our water. So is there thriving natural world? And we know that persons who have a lower income, who are more likely to be persons with severe and persistent mental illness, live in areas that have higher air pollution, or are more likely to live in areas with water that may have cancerous agents. And so all of this is connected to the vital conditions of persons with behavioral health disorders. So you can't fully ignore all of these things if you want persons to thrive. So what do we do? Right? And I think I'm going to go ahead and skip to this one real quick so I can talk a little bit more about equity before we get there. So let me talk to you about the concept of equity. And equity is not the same as equality. So equity is how the way that you achieve equality. And it's achieving fairness in the treatment of outcomes is kind of the goal. And you recognize that different people have varying needs of support and assistance for that equity. And so what I would like you to do is imagine an escalator. So one is going up and one is going down. And these escalators represent the things that may help or hinder you in your life. So for me, I am a person of privilege. I'm a white person who experiences privilege. I have never been homeless. I come from a middle class family who paid for my college education. If I would have failed out of college, my parents would have helped me. If I would have gotten sick, then I had insurance to pay for that. If while I was working, I got sick, I had vacation or sick time. I always had a deep bench in my life that I could rely on persons. And that deep bench also included things like health insurance and secure housing, and a history, a lifelong family history of that security. So even though I'm going up that escalator, even if I stumble because I lose my job, I continue to go up because the escalator is moving up. So I will continue to succeed, or more likely to get up to the top and achieve. Whereas persons who face challenges or don't have those same supports, it's like they're running up a down escalator. They face so many different challenges that get in their way, barriers. So they may be part of intergenerational poverty, or racism, which impact their ability to gain income. They're faced with medical challenges like behavioral health disorders, where they can't get gainful employment. They're faced with not having insurance. They're faced with multiple incarcerations that they can't get taken off their record, which then impacts their ability to get gainful employment. So they're running up this down escalator, and it is 10 times harder to achieve the top for them than it is for me. And God forbid if they trip and fall, because they don't have that security of people to help them. And and they won't continue to rise, and they won't continue to get that help that they need, and they will fall down. And that's what we talk about when we talk about equity. There are people who have built-in structural and institutional help within our country, and there are persons who face barriers, structural and institutional barriers, to where it makes them extremely hard for them to succeed and achieve within our country. And so that's when we look at what can we do as a faith community. And this is where we talk about the model for this, and all that centers within this is looking at equity. And so it's two major jobs for faith communities. It's looking at improving the health and well-being of the people that you directly reach. So how do you build your missions and your programs around that? And then how do you improve the health and well-being of the places where people work, live, learn, play, and pray? So you're looking at populate the community, and then you're looking at the individuals that you're with, all within an equity lens. So what does this mean? And this is when we talk about shifting your mindset from looking at a whole person and a whole community. And this is when we talk about shifting the interventions or the missions that you do from charity to helping them achieve equity, so that ultimately persons can be liberated. And there's some basic principles that you look at when you talk about this model. And this charity, equity, liberation, it's about your mindset when you do this work. It's also ingrained in the governance, and it's ingrained in the processes. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So in your mindsets, as you do this work, of course, it's grounded in your faith, and it has to come out of love for one another, and about that frame set of abundance. So a lot of it's challenging in today's society to come from a mindset of scarcity. And oftentimes we are afraid, either consciously or subconsciously, that we will lose our power and that there's not enough for everybody. But understanding that there is abundance in the world, and life is not about a pie and you will lose your piece. God offers abundance. And so as you do this work, you understand that there is abundance within this, and there cannot be fear as you participate within this process. So that's what we talk about, how your mindset has to change within this. And then when we talk about the process, what does this process look like as you go through changing your mission to be equitable and then liberating? And we talk about wanting the change to continue to adapt, and it has to be sustainable. That it can't be a one and done project and then it stays. It actually has to be something that takes a life of its own. and helps grow the people into their liberation and grows the community into a life of its own. And so something that stays stuck and stale is not something that would lead to liberation. And finally, we talk about our governance. And this is talks about who would play a part within this mission. And we talk about its partnerships. And it's not just one faith community or one entity doing this, but it would be multiple faith communities. It would be multiple community partners, and it would include persons with lived experience. And the most important part about this is that it wouldn't be the faith community is the one with the strongest voice, or the community partner has the strongest voice. We're talking about who's in the driver's seat, and the person with lived experience being within that driver's seat. And so that's how we experience that equity and then ultimately that liberation. So I, would encourage you to think about different ways that you can transform your missions into becoming more liberating. So transforming them from charity to liberation. That means looking at the wholeness of the person and the wholeness of the community that they live within. That doesn't necessarily mean that your church has to take everything on, or your faith community has to take everything on, but it could look like connecting and creating community faith connections, and going through this process with them and saying, what is in our community that we need to look at that needs healing and improving, so that we can look at those vital conditions within that. So I'd like to I've been doing a lot of talking, and that's too long of talking for adult learning. So I'd like to propose to y'all in a chat or even out loud, 2 questions just to start the conversation. Of course, I welcome more, but one thing that we like to do is harvest stories. Harvest stories about what is already going on and what are you doing, and then thinking about, that is good work. That's good work that's been happening. But how can we shift those narratives from charity to liberation? What changes can happen so that they can be moved, so that persons can really become liberated? And then also, I want you to think about, who will you partner with to help lay a path forward for liberating communities so people can live in wholeness? So I'm going to offer that pondering for everyone. And as you're ready, I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Anyone can be free to unmute themselves and jump into the conversation.
Hi, I'm Diane Zabotrisky in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I know, as just an individual myself, I have been working with some people in a bar that I used to work in. And I know that it's when you invite them into your life, is something that kind of helps with their liberation. Instead of being a charity, you don't make it like, you're helping them. You're making it like they're helping you to learn things, and you do things together, and it makes them want to be a better person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, it's about learning to be in relationship with persons. And I think more now than ever, how to be in authentic relationships with people is so important. Especially persons that you may not have anything in common with, and how you can be in love or love persons in those relationships. And so when we talk about this, or any work that you do, it's less about strategy, and it's more about relational. It's relationship driven as opposed to strategically driven. And I think that's what's really important.
I definitely have to agree with Miss Diane, as she was talking about how having a conversation. And I mean, I know it was individuals that she knew of, and I think that's one thing about us as human beings. We can tell when a person is really being genuine, even if it's somebody that we know, like that we already have like a relationship with, but then also if it's somebody brand new, and just kind of just welcome them, like Miss Diane was talking about, inviting them into kind of like your world, and just through conversation, not really, trying to force them to do anything, but just like, hey, tell me about you, what makes you unique. I think that's one way to really get those stories going, and just helping individuals just by conversation, helping them to see that, there are, there's different avenues of how to, to have a successful life, or what that looks like. And each person is different. And just helping individuals kind of to see that, because sometimes we have a tendency of like comparing ourselves with others or each other, and like, well, they did it this way, but everybody's so different. So it's kind of like making your own narrative, but helping them to see that they have that ability to do so. Because sometimes when you're going through, I hate to say, like going through so much, you're not even thinking about that. You're thinking about, how am I going to get out of this situation? Like, what do I have to do? But it's those small little things that we do, and just to recognize and help them to know that they could be successful. And it could be through nonprofits, like of course churches, but just even there might be just small organizations within your community that will, just reaching out to them saying, hey, I never thought about that. Yeah, we would love to help with that. And just being able to make those connectors, and helping that person to see that these resources are out here. Because once again, when you're going through, if you've never been taught, you're not going to know how to kind of look at those different, I guess I would say, different resources or ways of doing things as an opportunity, because nobody's never showed you. So just being able to take them by the hand, as Miss Diane was saying, and just being relational with them, and just not telling them what to do, but just like, hey, this is like open to you, like what would you like to do first, or what kind of helping them to see, what motivates them, what is something that will be, encouraging to them, or that will help them to just look at things in a different perspective, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we really talk about, I think you said that you invite them into your life, but I think often you're invited into their life. And I think where some missteps happen, and I don't think this is anything intentional, but sometimes charity models live from our own framework of privilege, right? As opposed to, and having them mold into what is more convenient for us, as opposed to what's more convenient for them, and ultimately what empowers them. So we're talking, and fixing them, right? But we're talking about, how can we be in communion with them? How can we be in communion with people and live together? And the whole community is healthy, so that no matter who you are, everyone can thrive in communion, because it's good for me and it's good for you and it's good for you and you and you and you if we have humane housing. It's good for everyone, no matter where you're at in life. And so I think your relationship and your communion there is super, super important.
And I agree with you. My question is, how do you reach that? Faith communities are known, or their missions often are charity driven.
Mhm.
And for them to get the mindset beyond that, it feels good to them. My question to you, so how do you work through those barriers, and work with communities and faith communities all working together for the good? And you use the word liberation, which is a new word to me. I was thinking more of empowerment. How is empowerment and liberation? How do they differ?
I'm sorry, you cut out on the very last part.
I'm asking. I'm intrigued by your terminology, liberating. I always think of empowerment. So are they one and the same, or how do they differ?
I still missed that last part, and I think you were talking about liberation.
Right.
Yeah, and there are so many different definitions of liberation, especially when you look into the theology of liberation, right? Oh my goodness, right? And we're talking about the ability for a person to live for themselves, right? Let's just kind of like make it simple and easy without dependency on something, and be able to live within a community to where they can live for themselves without a dependency. And so oftentimes when I work within faith communities, it's a good place to start with some examples of where faith communities have shifted. For example, a food pantry, how they've, because 80% of emergency food comes from faith communities. Did y'all know that? That is like huge, right? So if we could shift those to a different model where it empowers people to where they have sustainable income as opposed to relying on those emergency food pantries, then that would be a huge shift in our economy. And so I talk about how some faith communities have moved from food pantries to working with people to create their own individual agriculture farms using grants with the USDA, partnering specifically with Black farmers who have faced challenges with land ownership and that sort of thing. And so they create a network with Black farmers that then feed into their food pantry. And so it creates that ability to gain income for persons who want to go into that field, and still allows for that necessary for emergency food as well. So it's just kind of rethinking and tweaking the work that you can do. And I think it's a lot of education as well about how we understanding the escalator as well, that not everybody is on the same up escalator. That's just my opinion. And then I think living in communion with folks. So it takes time, it takes gatherings is what we do. And lots of gatherings and listenings and capacity building.
And if I can add on to that, I think another big part of what keeps the services churches and communities are trying to provide in that charity setting or concept is that the relationships don't develop because the service becomes entirely transactional. And so the humanity of people in those services get, sort of put to the side or forgotten or left out. And that's one thing that we talk a lot about at Pathways, right? With our companionship model, it's how do you move out of that transactional engagement into relationship with people? And that's when you start to hear the stories. That's when you start to understand where people really are at and what they really need. And you can let them decide the next steps for themselves and be a part of that journey with them rather than deciding it for them.
I'm really glad that you mentioned listening, because I really think that's where it starts, is to deeply really listen to the other person and try to understand where they're coming from and what it is that they're dealing with in their life, and let them know that they are a precious human being just like anybody else. Just your presence itself is a gift to them.
Well, I've sort of been doing this for the past 20 years with one friend, and it's taken a lot of time, and we're working through not having a codependent relationship, because I have finances and she's on disability, and I'm white and she's black, and all the same things you were talking about, Jennie. And it takes a lot of time. She was in a relationship with some of the other people in our church, and they didn't have the time to really deeply listening. They were very much more into this compassion mode, this, charity mode. And it takes time to do the things that you're talking about, and if I've been able to do it because I'm a full-time volunteer. I'm not employed, but for people who are employed, are going to school, or have a lot of significant other responsibilities, which is happening to me increasingly. So I have less time for my friend. It's, how can you maintain that capacity, and then, people on the edge who are trying to run up the down escalator are always having crises, and so it's very difficult to know how to help people manage crises. And you can easily get sucked into them and try to become, like you said, Jennie, a fixer. And we're trying to sort of distance ourselves from the crisis mode, but it's very difficult.
Yes, and absolutely. And I think that is one of the critical components that you can't forget about as a church, in a faith community, in an organization, is your role for advocacy and civil muscle. And what can you do to make it easier to stop that escalator from going down? Because you can push that person up the escalator, right? Or you can pick them up when they fall. You can do all of that, but you yourself are going to get exhausted. Or like you said, you won't always be there. But us as a church, or us as people in a community, we got to stop that escalator. Like, it's not fair, right? And how do we do that? And a lot of that is going to be policy work. A lot of that is going to be advocacy. A lot of that can be partnerships with healthcare institutions, foundations, that sort of thing, to where they can make humane housing. That's a big thing right now. I know with health systems, with paying for making sure that there is humane housing out there. So I think that you can't ignore that piece of it, or else you're right. You are constantly pushing someone up the escalator and you will get exhausted.
So there is a church in our community that is working on humane housing. They've been doing it for 20 years. They've started their own development corporation. And their next big project is, so they've been helping individual homeowners within the Black community especially, to be able to buy houses. And they've been undercutting the local people at Yale University and other places. And they've gotten some pushback from those folks, you know. But it's actually been very exciting. They came to our church to talk about it. And then my husband and I talked to them about how can we don't yet see how we can specifically help, but we're just sort of praying about that. But they're doing that. And one of the things that their next project is to have low, medium, and high income apartments all together in an inner city location that's accessible to transportation, and you have people from all different incomes living in the same block, not just the same block, but in the same apartment complex. So, and with some, because right now, with people who are on disability for mental health issues, etc., because right now, if you're on disability in Connecticut, you can't, they won't give you a rent unless you have at least 60% or 70% of your income that's not going towards rent. That means that you can only afford a place for, if you have $700 for Social Security, you can only place for $150, and that doesn't exist except for supportive housing. And the funds for that have been slashed and slashed and slashed every year. And not only that, but the primary organization that provides supportive housing pays their staff so little, and it seems to be primarily focused now on making money, that the supportive housing is not very supportive. And I've had, 4 friends who have gotten really screwed. One girl got, beaten up by her neighbor and nearly strangled her by her roommate. Another one, the supportive housing wouldn't deal with his roommate's drug addictions. So he was having crack parties every night. And then when they finally got my friend different housing, the crack guy, trashed his stuff. And 9 months later, almost a year later, he still hasn't gotten any recovery from his, from the staff who are trying to supposedly help him. So it's even the supportive housing, it's a mess.
Yeah, and these are all systems that are in place that make people run up the down escalator. You can't have savings. You are restricted by how much money you have to spend on certain things. These are down escalator issues that are institutional, and so people cannot win, right? And that's what we have to realize, that our traditional charity models are not going to work. People will not be able to thrive under those conditions.
Jennie, would you mind speaking a bit more, just providing some more resources and strategies for individuals and communities, especially faith communities, to build capacity for this work?
Sure. Yeah, I think, like I said, it starts with stories too, is gathering your stories on work that you are already doing and then trying to see how you can do it. It's also about, do you already have the right voices? Who do you already have at the table? And I think that's one of the most important things that you can do. And that may take time. If you've been able to build that trust already, to where they can have, feel safe to contribute those conversations, and then build that civic muscle within themselves so that they can empower and make those changes. So I would say finding voices, the unheard voices within a community would be important. Harvesting stories and building civic muscles for those unheard voices would be some of my top things that I would look at. Understanding how to have convenings, of course, for a church themselves, really understanding scarcity versus abundance, which goes a lot into racism and privilege, especially if you are predominantly white church. So going within, deep within those issues as well.
Well, an exciting development here in Connecticut is a state-funded organization called Advocacy Unlimited. And in October, they did a 3-week class, which was amazing, on compassionate advocacy rather than angry advocacy. And now we are starting a social media campaign, probably Friday, to help transform the mental health community systems here in Connecticut. And we're trying to do it without creating enemies. And I'll put up in a chat in a few minutes the sort of mission statement that we developed. And we figure, okay, we want to start making the mental health community, the mental health system, more accessible, not just in terms of accessibility, but more accessible to actually recovery models rather than simply throwing pills at people. You know, that includes the deep listening and, you know, peer support, things like that. We have you made some progress here in Connecticut, but there's still a long ways to go. And the people who are in on this project have you know, butted their heads for years trying to do legislative stuff. And they finally realized they need a broader coalition. So it's exciting to see a lot of people, the people with lived experience are leading this. And then others like myself who are family members of people with lived experience, you know, we are contributing, and it's a pretty interesting thing. But it is slow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's something called network weaving as well. It's a very organic way of finding people within the community and identifying what their strengths are when it comes to networking, and then building that civic muscle. So network weaving is a really great and organic way of building community. Some learnings that would be good to understand groundwater and the poisoning of groundwater and how it impacts people's ability to live would be Race Equity Institute. They do online trainings that are really great. And so I would suggest kind of those 2 things would be really good.
We have a couple questions here. Would you mind expanding on what you mean by convenings and elaborate a bit more on the civic muscle?
Yeah. So often civic muscle, you think about voting or motivating voters to go out there. But when I talk about civic muscle, is empowering people to understand what's going on in their community and understanding how they can impact that. So for example, one of the civic muscle activities that we had is through network weaving of what we did, we found people who had the same interest in removing a Civil War statue at a courthouse. And they were complete opposite people. They never would have crossed paths before, these people, but through this exercise of network weaving over the year, they had a relationship, and then they identified that this is something that they wanted to do together. They had never done anything, any advocacy work before, any political work before, but they knew that this is something that they were passionate about. And so understanding and learning together how they could go through the process of removing that statue. And through the relationship between each other, they were able to balance out how we can do this to where everybody was happy with it. you know, putting it in a respectful location, while, you know, and garnishing or leveraging financial support from other people so that it can be moved into a different location. So using the power of the people to make changes that they can make themselves within their local community. It also, another example was a zoning change from a stay-at-home mom. She had no idea that she could impact zoning issues within her small rural town. And so through that network weaving, she found somebody who could help guide her through that process and learn how to build that civic muscle. So that those are just some examples of what you can do to impact your community, improve that. It's kind of taking the power back to the people of where it had intended to be. Convenings is what we talk about getting those people together in a room, often to either you can do that as a network weaving process to identify what their things are, but convenings are also where you identify what are the community vital conditions that you feel need improving. And that's what we, you know, has anybody read the book The Tipping Point too? You know, like where is everybody on the biggest agreement, and you can really make that tipping point as well. And so a lot of those convenings circle around that as well, but it is relationship driven with those convenings. So it's getting those all those players in the room, building relationships, finding a tipping point, understanding stories.
Any last questions or thoughts for Jennie?
Do you have any books or resources to give you more concrete ways to do some of these strategies?
This is a fairly new approach, something that I've been working on with foundations. I could come up with some structures on that and send it out to the group.
So
anything in specific that you're interested in?
Well, I'd say all of the above. I actually am I used to work for Extension where we did community building, but also worked for a faith community as a program director. Now I'm retired, but working voluntarily in a community, in a different community, on successful ways and trying to have the mind shift from charity, which they have, which many do, to moving beyond that. And it's hard to, I want more concrete ways. I did it myself in this other community, pretty much going out in the community time and getting partners. But this time I'm removed, but giving some oversight on ways to do that for faith communities. And it's more of an urban area. I was working in a rural area, so it's a whole different ballgame. So, so
okay, sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jennie. I think this is a good transition to if anyone has resources that they know that they would like to share with the group. If you know your organization or faith community is doing different projects or you know creating something new or different events are going on that you want to share with the group, please be free to do any of that before we sign off. So would anyone like to share?
Well, I'll just say that there's a psychiatrist who has been a psychiatrist for 40 years in Boston. He has something called the New Empowerment Center. And he's developed this thing called emotional CPR, which he wants to share with trainings all over the nation. And this is the idea of teaching people how to do deep listening. Because we can say deep listening is great, but knowing how to do it is something totally different. And and it's not just deep listening to the other person, it's also seeing where your story can connect with them. So it's like heart-to-heart emotional resuscitation. It's really good. So I'll put that in the chat, that information.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else like to share?
So is your organization called Pathways to Promise, or what? Tell us a little bit about you guys.
So Pathways to Promise is a interfaith mental health organization. We're a nonprofit. We do different direct services as well as provide educational resources. I'll put the website in the chat. We also, our main program is something that we call the Companionship Movement. And this is a model of relational engagement. We do, 4-hour workshops that are offered in person and virtually, teaching people 5 different practices of hospitality. How do you create safe space, neighboring, and leveling out power dynamics, and what does that look like, and what does that mean? Deep listening, how do you listen well, and what do you listen for? Walking side by side, accompanying people on their journey, without pushing or pulling or coaching, or letting people take the next steps for themselves. So it's a model that really advocates for the dignity and agency and mutuality of every human. So that is something that Pathways has available. But our websites have a lot of really great resources. Most of them are free. Almost all of them are free. And all of the webinars that we've done in this Engage, Learn, and Network series are posted on the website as well, available for folks to watch. There's a lot of great topics there. Also some great resources that may be helpful in further education in different areas. So I'm happy to answer more questions about Pathways to Promise or the Companionship Movement if y'all have any. I'll put the website in the chat really fast. And then, we will also be posting this webinar on the website as well. So if you want to share it around, if there's any piece of it that you may have missed, it will be available on the Pathways to Promise website.
Is the PowerPoint available as well on the website?
It will be a part of the recording. Yes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you guys located?
We are technically founded out of St. Louis, Missouri, but we are a group of folks that live all over the country. So our executive director is in Nevada. I am in Washington. Cody is in Oklahoma. So we've got folks all over the country. But we were technically founded in St. Louis. Mm-hmm.
Are you related to NAMI?
We are not related to NAMI, but we do have quite a partnership with NAMI. We work quite a bit with NAMI FaithNet and different NAMI affiliates across the country. Right now, we are working with 5 different NAMI affiliates because of a grant that we received in helping different NAMI affiliates connect with their faith communities in the local areas. And that is going beautifully. So we're developing new connections to different affiliates every day. But we also have a board member who is a prominent member in the NAMI San Antonio community. But so we partner with NAMI quite a bit, but we're not technically affiliated.
Thank you.
So you know about the movie Ernie and Joe?
Yes, not a
Yeah.
lot, but I do know about it.
We're bringing that to New Haven, Connecticut. And the gal who produced it is living nearby in Guilford, Connecticut. And I thought it was great to see the way, you know, she actually emphasized the faith community part of that, you know. But if our NAMI affiliate in Connecticut, in New Haven, would be interested in, how could we develop a relationship with you?
Yes. So I will put a great, I can't type and speak at the same time, apparently. I put our email address in the chat box. We also have a phone number on the website. And I would say, give us a call or shoot us an email, and let's set up a meeting and chat about the different ways that we could partner. I think that would be a great opportunity for both of us.
Great. Yes, because several of our faith communities have been, you know, really positively shaken to the core by the events of the last 7 months.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just asking ourselves now, how do we do this?
Mm-hmm.
You know. And then I'm vice president of our local NAMI affiliate, and I find I'm always talking to people who are in crisis, either people with lived experience or family members. And I've been able to use the deep listening skills that I learned through emotional CPR. And it's been really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
Vicki, can I just like ask real quick? So you say the past 7 months. Would you say the racial enlightenment for white people, or would you say the COVID?
More the racial enlightenment. We're part of 3 different congregations, and one congregation, local Episcopal church with a number of Yale folks in it, and one African American gal. We were watching a missions movie of a Fiji Island revival, and one of the parts of the revival was the Black Fijians repented for killing a white missionary, and so the Black woman was like, how could they? I mean, they don't need to repent for that. And so we had this whole discussion about missionaries versus colonists, and that ended up becoming a 4-week series on racial issues, which was really good. And we've all learned so much. And then our one of our other churches is a very multicultural church with a Black pastor and his Puerto Rican wife, and the other pastor is Caucasian with a Korean wife, and the other pastor is a white pastor with a Hispanic wife. So, and multiple interracial groups. And so we're, you know, that we were meeting every week in person or otherwise, you know, trying to figure out how can we, you know, develop change in our communities. And I think we're just at the, you know, beginning, understanding, trying to figure this out, just talk about it. And so it seems as if what you guys are talking about might be very apropos.
Yeah, I would certainly, I'm doing a strategic plan for a denomination for their strategy for ending racism in their lifetime. So I think there's a lot that can go within that. Also, Be the Bridge. If you're a participant, I'm a facilitator for Be the Bridge, which is racial reconciliation within the church. that would be a really great thing to do as well.
Hmm.
Any final questions, thoughts? I would really encourage all of you who are interested in, diving deeper into this subject to send Jennie an email. I think it would be an amazing partnership. Of course, Pathways is always open and excited about partnerships as well. The Companionship Movement is a great resource, especially for folks who are really just beginning some of this work. So I would encourage you all to visit the websites. I would encourage you all to reach out if you have questions, if you have any thoughts that you want to sort of toss around between Jennie or Pathways. We're very open to that. So thank you all so much for being here. It's been an amazing conversation. Jennie, thank you so much for your time and for sharing. It's an honor to have you as a part of our network of people and partners. So I hope you all have a wonderful Wednesday and a good start to this new crazy year that we've entered into.
Goodbye. Peace to all.
Thank you.